but he got the nickname Santa Claus because he would pull up on his enemigos annually on Christmas. He also had a reputation allegedly for surviving lethal gunshot wounds and coming out of intense shootings unbothered and just kept coming back.
Meet the baddest of the bad, the gangster even the FBI wishes they could erase from history. This isn't your run-of-the-mill villain. We're talking about a real-life nightmare, a figure so sinister he made Al Capone look like a Boy Scout. This is the story of the most evil gangster the FBI desperately wants you to forget about. Meet Alberto, or as the streets of South Central Los Angeles know him, Santa Claus. His story begins with the Rollin 20s neighborhood Bloods, in a neighborhood where poverty, violence, and gang life were just part of the landscape.
Spade and No-No in them era and all that, they were saying Rollin 20s. And the families was Rollin 20s. But you know, the Outlaws, the original Rollin 20s.
Yeah.
Born into this world, Alberto's path was pretty much set from the get-go, destined to get tangled up in the web of the underworld. But why does the FBI want us to forget? What secrets lie buried beneath the surface, hidden in the shadows of this gangster's empire? Join us as we peel back the layers of deception, uncovering the truth behind the legend. Back in the wild 50s and 60s, South Central was like a pressure cooker of gang activity, with different crews duking it out for control and respect. And right in the thick of it was Alberto, finding his place among the Rollin 20s neighborhood Bloods. He wasn't just any member, though. He was part of the gang's second generation, deeply woven into the fabric of the community. Blood Alley, a notorious hotspot tucked close to the Santa Monica Freeway on Cordova Street, was where Alberto's gang persona truly blossomed. While the original Blood Alley gang started to fade out by the early 70s, the sense of gang loyalty remained strong. Out of this spirit, the seeds were sown for what would eventually grow into the Rolling 20 Bloods. In 1971, the name Rollin 20s was chosen, signaling a fresh start in South Central's ever-evolving gang scene. At just 16 years old, Alberto was brought into the fold of the Rolling 20s, showing right from the start that he was dead set on making the Rolling 20s a force to be reckoned with in the gang world of LA County. With bold confidence, Alberto launched into a whirlwind of gang activity that would go down in South Central's annals. His commitment to the Rolling 20s was undeniable, reflected in his flashy wardrobe choices. Think red house shoes, red rags, and Alberto laced up with red. Each piece of attire was a declaration of loyalty to the Rolling 20s, showing the world just where his allegiances lay. But Alberto wasn't just about flashy displays of loyalty. He had bigger plans brewing beneath the surface. As he climbed higher within the Rolling 20s, he wasn't content with just street-level antics. He had his eyes set on something greater, expanding the gang's reach, forming alliances, and securing territory. In 1985, something big happened in the streets of Los Angeles. It wasn't just any meeting. It was a gathering of neighborhoods, a coming together of folks from Arlington to Caw Boulevard. They called themselves the Rollin 30s and the Rollin 60s, but they weren't just any groups. They were cliques, tight-knit communities with names that carried weight. In response, Santa Claus called for a meeting. It was about something serious. It was about officially establishing the Second Avenues as a real clique. And when the Second Avenues showed up, it was like a celebration, but their celebration was being watched. Not long into the meeting, groups of Harlem Crips descended into their neighborhood and started attacking both sides of their park, boxing them in. But in the midst of chaos, one man stood tall: Santa Claus. Without a moment's hesitation, he dashed towards the danger, determined to protect his community. From the stories told of it, Santa Claus just raised his arm and fired 3 shots at the assailants, striking down one of them. Oh, and he didn't stop there. He fired 2 more shots, taking down another Crip. The gang's ambush had backfired, and they scrambled to retreat, hastily bundling up their injured comrades and fleeing the scene in a speeding car. Now the 20s, already strong with 4 cliques, were growing. They were becoming known as one of the top blood gangs in LA County. Their territory expanded like wildfire. From Vermont to Crenshaw, their neighborhood stretched out, covering the West Adams area. But it didn't stop there. It reached north, passing Washington, Venice Boulevard, and Pico, between Caw and Western Avenue. This wasn't just about claiming space. It was about making a bold statement. The Rolling 20 Bloods weren't just a gang. They were a force to be reckoned with. Santa Claus was known for his boldness and fearlessness. He would proudly display his allegiance by wearing red from head to toe, often getting into conflicts with rival gangs like the Harlem Crips. His hatred for them ran deep, and he was involved in numerous altercations, earning him a reputation as a formidable opponent. Santa Claus didn't spread cheer, he spread terror. Many people literally claimed he haunted the dreams of his enemies, striking fear into their hearts on many occasions. His weapon of choice? Not gifts, but guns. But of course, as it happens in every situation like this, his actions drove the rival gang members to pick up arms themselves, escalating the violence on the streets. Christmas wasn't a time of joy for the Crips, it was a time of dread. Santa Claus would pay them a deadly visit, leaving behind a trail of bloodshed. But his reign of terror wasn't confined to the holiday season. It was a year-round nightmare, a constant threat hanging over their heads. But one fateful night in 1981, Santa Claus met his match. As he walked home from his girlfriend's house, members of the Harlem Crips gang ambushed him. Shots rang out in the darkness and Santa Claus fell, left for dead in the alley. Guess what, though? This man still defied the odds, surviving the attack and shocking his enemies when he walked down the street just 1 week later. But things were heating up in the streets, especially between his crew, the Rolling 20s and the Harlem Crips. Santa knew they needed a new plan, fast. Back then, gangs stuck together like glue, and the Harlem Rolling 30s Crips found support in the Rolling 60s Crips. But with all the infighting among Crips themselves, Santa saw an opportunity to make a bold move. He gathered his troops, known as the TS, and they suited up in the blood signature red for a mission. Their target? A key spot where the Harlem Rolling 30s Crips held it down, the intersection of Dinker and Jefferson Boulevard. It was risky, but they were ready to make their mark. As they rolled up, they spotted some Harlem 30s right in their sights. The tension was thick, but the TS didn't hesitate. One of them shouted out a code, West Side 60 Crips. It was like a signal, and they unleashed a storm of bullets. In the chaos, they hit their target and bolted, leaving behind a scene of confusion and pain. Back at their hideout, they counted their losses. It wasn't easy, casualties on both sides, but they had accomplished their mission. One fateful day, orders come down from the top that Santa Claus, a figure feared by many, should command a group of 20s members to venture into showline territory in search of their rivals, the Rolling 30s. As they arrive, tensions reach a boiling point and a clash erupts on the Venice boardwalk. Law enforcement intervenes, but not before many were arrested from both sides. Yet, the conflict doesn't end there. Back on their home turf, the 20s still retaliated against the Harlem 30s on a deeply personal level. Both sides know each other intimately, so Santa Claus and his gang targeted their homes with precision strikes. Even the home of a high-ranking OG from Harlem wasn't spared. During a party thrown for his homies, chaos erupts as Santa Claus and his crew storm the house, guns blazing. Multiple lives were lost that night, and word spread like wildfire through the streets. Santa Claus's brazen actions left many wondering if he's truly untouchable. In the midst of this turmoil, families were torn apart. Communities were gripped by fear, and innocent lives hung in the balance. The streets of South End was a battleground where loyalty was everything, and survival was far from guaranteed. Santa Claus found himself in a tough spot. He ended up spending 7 years in jail. But in 1992, he finally got out. Guess what? His pals, the 20s lack, threw him a big party with lots of drugs and money. It was quite the homecoming. Now, fresh out of the slammer, Santa didn't waste any time. He became the leader of a fight against some mean dudes called the Schoolyard Crips. These guys were the enemies of Santa's crew, the 20s. The battleground, the streets of Cow. Skirmishes between the two gangs happened all the time. It was like a real-life action movie. Fast forward to January 13th night back in 1993, when the gang world was rocked to its core. Santa Claus, a larger-than-life figure for many, was found unalived. The blame game began, and fingers were pointed at the Schoolyard Crips by the evening. This accusation sent shockwaves through the streets, sparking retaliation from the Rolling Twenties gang. Gathering swiftly at Lauren Miller Park, the Rolling Twenties convened to plan their revenge. That very night, they struck back at 5 different Crips hoods simultaneously: the Harlem Crips, the Schoolyard Crips, the West Boulevard Crips, the Rolling 40 Crips, and the 5-5 Neighborhood Crips. Their message was crystal clear. They were ready to spill blood for their cause. In response, the Harlem Crips and the Schoolyard Crips wasted no time in retaliating. The streets turned into a battleground as the violence escalated. Within days, the Schoolyard Crips were willing to negotiate a truce, vehemently denying their involvement in Santa's. However, the war raged on, particularly against the Harlem Crips, leaving a trail of bodies in its wake. The Rolling Twenties didn't stop there. They launched further assaults, targeting the Rolling 40s and the 5-5 Neighborhood Crips with ruthless efficiency. The carnage reached its peak at the corner of Vermont and Vernon, where the Rolling 40s felt the full force of the Rolling 20s' fury. Similarly, the 5-5 Neighborhood Crips were hit hard, facing a barrage of gunfire. Through their actions, the Rolling 20s sent a chilling message to gangs across Los Angeles. They showcased their strength and determination, declaring war on multiple Crips hoods without hesitation. The streets became a battleground, with each side vying for dominance and retribution. When the truth about Santa Claus's came out, it left many people shocked and confused. You see, it wasn't some tough gang member or someone from the streets. No, it was a small-time weed dealer from Jamaica. Can you believe it? The young guns in the neighborhood searched high and low for the culprit, but he had vanished, maybe even left town to escape the heat. Before we go further, though, here's a brief rundown of the history of the Bloods and the Crips, for those of you who don't know yet. The Crips, one of the most infamous and enduring gangs in American history, trace their roots back to the streets of Los Angeles in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Founded by Raymond Washington and Stanley Tookie Williams, the Crips initially formed as protective coalitions for their neighborhoods, aiming to defend against external threats from rival gangs. The Crips gang has been around for a long time, but many folks didn't know much about them. At first, they were called the Avenue Cribs, but later they changed their name to the Crips. But here's the twist. The Bloods actually came from the Crips. Yeah, you heard that right. They were like a little brother gang that split off. Then things got spicy. There was a big fight between the Crips and another group called the Pierus. The Pierus wanted to break ties with the Crips and teamed up with other gangs like the Brims and the Bishops. For these two other gangs, the Crips had caused trouble for them earlier, so they were ready to throw down too.
Because remember, if you wasn't a Crip, you was an enemy. But we still talking about the independence of some of these sets. Down with everybody already. That was just us being aligned with everybody else. You know what I mean? Because in reality, like I said before, a set was sets were independent. A Brim was a Brim back then.
After a powwow, the Bloods were born. They weren't just a small group. They grew fast and became a big deal in Los Angeles. Other gangs fed up with the Crips joined them to protect their turf. Evidently, the Bloods weren't just troublemakers. They were a crew aiming to make their hoods safer and stronger. They called themselves the United Blood Nation and fought hard to defend their neighborhoods. As the influence of both gangs grew, so did their rivalry. What began as a struggle for neighborhood protection soon evolved into a fierce battle for territory and dominance within the city. The streets of Los Angeles became battlegrounds with frequent clashes between the Bloods and Crips, resulting in tragic losses of life. Now, back to Alberto. Of course, the 20s wanted revenge for their fallen leader, but justice was denied. Despite looking high and far for the drug dealer that Alberto, the Rollin' 20s came up dry. It was a truly frustrating moment for them, all that bloodshed for nothing. But anyways, Santa Claus had already built a reputation and a legacy that couldn't be erased. Despite his involvement in shady dealings, he was still revered, remembered as one of the top 10 riders in gang history. In the wake of Santa, the city was gripped by fear and uncertainty. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, while authorities struggled to contain the violence. Alberto's reign of terror might have come to an end with his death, but the impact of his actions still lingers in the streets of South Central Los Angeles. Even after his demise, there's a strong push to uncover the truth about what he did, a journey driven by a deep need to understand how his actions affected the community and to prevent such tragedies from happening again. It's a tough road ahead, but it's crucial for healing and moving forward. People from different backgrounds, police, community groups, and regular folks, have been known to work together towards this goal. Who knew one man could shake up the world like that? But Alberto Santa Claus definitely did. Unraveling Alberto's story isn't easy. Years have passed, and people are still afraid of gang retaliation, with witnesses too scared to speak up. But there are brave souls who refuse to back down. They're determined to find justice for the victims and hold those responsible for the violence accountable. Their resilience gives hope in the face of adversity, inspiring others to join the fight for a safer community. But this journey isn't just about finding answers. It's also about looking inward and confronting uncomfortable truths. Poverty, lack of opportunities, and systemic inequalities have all contributed to the rise of gangs like the Rolling 20 Bloods. Acknowledging these issues forces us to take a hard look at our society and work towards real change that addresses the root causes of violence and injustice. Finding the truth won't be quick or easy. There will be obstacles and setbacks along the way. But by staying united and staying true to our values, we can create a better future where justice and integrity prevail. Alberto's story is a sobering reminder of what happens when these values are ignored, but it's also a call to action to do better. So, let's continue this journey towards truth and justice together. Let's stand up against violence and inequality and work towards a future where the echoes of Alberto's reign of terror are nothing but a distant memory. And that's all for today. Until next time, peace out.